time. Preaching time. Yeah, we had a little bit of downtime between the streams like I predicted. Sorry about that, y'all. We're going to do what we can. We're going to try and get back to the one a day. That's the goal. For today, we're listening to one of the older, actually almost the oldest of the streams, of the patches made during the stream. This is O2 Drum and Rand. I think this one was sent directly to Twitch, but not to YouTube. But I don't really remember. Doesn't matter. But I do know what we're doing today, so let's go to a clean slate. It is a lovely Sunday morning. Let's do this thing. A lovely Sunday morning. Okay. So today, I have a concept. I don't really have an end goal, but I do have a concept, and that's what I'm going to explore. From a musical point of view, our final patch today may not be the most exciting ever. We've had quite a few days where regular, musical patches were the thing. So I think I'm okay with that. Actually, what if I made the world's most low-grade sequencer ever? I just connected the clock directly to my percussion oscillator and connect him to the outputs. Now that's a simple friggin' patch. Super boring. Is that as slow as it goes? I think so. Okay, well that might even be too repetitive and boring even for me. Let's do this. There we go. Okay. Why did I make this super boring, simple little patch? What I want to do today is a deep dive into LFOs. Another way of looking at it is not just LFOs, but quote-unquote control voltage in general. So in some ways, this is a back-to-basics sort of thing. I think it's good, though. I mean, you may be sitting there saying, okay, Mr. Moo, I already know what an LFO is. And yes, I'm sure you do. But there's a lot of ways to look at them. There's a lot of ways to mix them or abuse them in musical ways. And maybe just by going back to the very basics, we can discover a few things we haven't thought about before. So let's just talk about control voltage. I'm pretty sure the guy who invented control voltage was Bob Moog, because Bob had invented an oscillator. But the idea of taking another oscillator and turning its speed down and sending it into the first oscillator to modulate its pitch, maybe Bob wasn't the first guy to ever do that, but he was probably the first guy to systematize that concept across an instrument. So at first he might have said, okay, I'm going to send this LFO into the pitch input of the oscillator and make the pitch wobble. Okay, I did that. And now I'm going to send it into the VCA and make the volume wobble. Okay, I did that. Well, now I'm going to send it into the filter cutoff frequency or the resonance and make that wobble. And he did that. So he realized that that output could be applied maybe not to every single parameter in a patch, but to many parameters. And one thing I think I eventually figured out myself was that what he's using that for is sort of like automated knob twisting. In other words, you could take, in my case, I'll take the mouse and grab this pitch knob, and I could wobble it to the left and wobble it to the right. And here I managed to hit A4 each time, if that was my goal, or get close to it. But even if I didn't have a specific goal in mind, I could say, well, I just want it to wobble a bit to the left and a bit to the right, and I want it to do that consistently. And you could sit there doing that all day as you played your melody. Or you could say, well, that is too much trouble and it's too inaccurate because I can't wobble it exactly plus A and then minus A each time. I keep missing my target notes. So I want something else which can do that for me. Well, an LFO, or a control voltage, does exactly that. So let's look at the ones we have here, the ones that are labeled official LFOs. I'm going to take the slaves just because each one is his own thing and lay them out. Oh, A gave me more options than I thought he was going to give me, but that's fine. There's D. And, okay, that was also a surprise. And there's E. Okay. Let's ignore for the moment the fact that these are red. Just pretend they're blue. In fact, all the concepts we're talking about today, control voltage is represented in the Nord Modular by the blue patch color. Red is supposed to be for audio. I'm not going to get into why these ones here have red instead. Let's just not worry about it. So let's look at what they gave us. The first oscillator has multiple forms: a sine, a triangle, a sawtooth going up, a sawtooth going down, and a square wave. This one is funky because it has a phase knob, so you can adjust the phase. You see how the square wave is changing there? So if you had two of these, let me just make another, you could have them perfectly locked to the same master oscillator, but then you could put one slightly out of phase with the other, and they'd still be going at the same speed, but their outputs would be a little bit different. I guess that's what the phase function is for. And yeah, our LFOs are even kind enough to give us a little flashing LED light when they do something. So first of all, let's turn the oscillator back on. I've got his decay turned up so we can hear his pitch. I'm going to take the first oscillator, wire it into his pitch input. First, let's put it in sine wave mode. Let's see what we hear. Well, the pitch is going up and down, and it's doing that smoothly without any steps or grades in the note. Let's increase the speed. Now we've got something like a vibrato. It's smoothly going up and down multiple times within each hit or within each trigger. The amount here, I don't need that red color, is adjustable so I could have it wobble less. That sounds like a vibrato to me. A mild, reasonable sort of vibrato. So that's what the sine wave gives us, a smooth modulation in sound. Let's switch to the triangle wave. Sounds very similar at this rate. And indeed, I think that triangle and sine are going to have not identical, but very similar effects in the same way that when they're used as oscillators, they can sound quite similar, although not identical. Because one is going up and one is going down. This one is going in a straight line. This one is going in, I assume, a logarithmic line. I think that's the right math word. But yeah, they're both just wobbling the pitch here. Great. Now let's try this guy. The interesting thing about the triangle wave as an LFO waveform is it has a very sharp line in it. That means you're going to get a very drastic change in information. In fact, if under certain musical circumstances, this can even produce a click in the sound, which is quite undesirable for certain applications or to certain people's ears. And I understand why. So a triangle wave is going to, a sawtooth wave in this form is going to start low and go up to a point, and then when it reaches its maximum, it's going to suddenly drop down. As you can hear, it's represented here. And once it drops dramatically, it will then begin to rise again and repeat the cycle. So you're going to get something like boo, boo, bee, boo, boo. If you can excuse my annoying singing, that sudden drop here is going to be quite noticeable. So let's turn the oscillator back on. Can we hear that? When it happens in the middle of a tone, sometimes it almost sounds like a new note triggering because the drop is so dramatic. And let's increase the rate a bit. I hope you can hear those occasional clicks that are being introduced into the sound. But what we're getting here is a controllable raise in pitch. And if we switch to the other sawtooth, we'll get the opposite. Again with the rate down. You get constantly sliding down effect, except when it briefly switches back up to the up mode again. So I think we can see how both of these would be useful if you wanted those changes in your pitch over time. I've connected it to the pitch input today, but of course LFOs are used for so many other things. It's just that this allows us a way to represent it or to hear what the sound changes are. If I patch this into a filter input or some other input, it may not be so noticeable to the ear. Finally, I want to go on to this guy, the square wave. Now, I talked in these streams before about how a square wave tends to lead us in the synth world into the area of computing, because a square wave is either on or off. It's a 0 or a 1. It's a binary state. And you can consider those vertical lines when it switches from one to the other to be practically instantaneous or happening in a billionth of a second where you don't actually hear it. So you don't experience that as a slide from the upper to the lower value, but rather an instantaneous, quote-unquote, change from one to the other. Now, I'm sure a science nerd could tell me why it's not exactly instantaneous, because the voltage change has to elapse over some amount of time, but for most intents and purposes, it's instantaneous. If we go back for a second to my knob twisting analogy, the sine wave and the triangle wave were sort of equivalent to me wobbling this knob from left to right. Stupid red color, go away. And this one would be sort of like me going up, 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 and then suddenly dropping all the way back down. And this one would be the reverse of that. Well, the square wave is two positions, so instead of being wobbling between one position and another, it would be like instantly flicking a switch where the pitch goes from here to here, and then back again, and then back again. So it's essentially saying I want to have two different positions in this case in the pitch, which I want to lock onto, and I only want to alternate between those two positions. I don't want to hear any other positions. Let's see how that sounds. So you can hear the low and the high notes that are being produced here. I'm not imitating it very well, but In some ways, it sounds a little bit like a police siren. Dee-noo-nee-noo. At least in my home country, that's what police sirens sound like. I guess they are also producing a tone and sending a square wave to it to alternate between two notes. I know other countries have their own ways of doing that, and that's fine. So, again, the point I'm trying to make here is there are two attributes which are being covered. The sine, more than any of the others, allows for a smooth transition between data. The saw and the reverse saw here are smooth in the sense of the linear part, but offer a sudden drop which may produce a click when they reach their vertical line. And the square tooth, of course, is nothing but vertical lines between two positions, and whether those are, farther or closer together, or if you used, like here, pulse width modulation to adjust the distance between them, it's still going to have that effect. It's still going to be one state or the other. That's the only two things it can be. In fact, let's do that right now, just because we have it here. This guy is only putting out a square wave, so he should give us some very similar content. Oh, did I give myself the wrong... Holy cow, I'm an idiot. That's not an LFO, that's an oscillator. No wonder it's the wrong thing. People are probably laughing at me at home right now. That's okay, feel free to laugh. There's the real ones. But since I already said it, let's do it. We'll get to these guys in a second. Let's take him all the way down. That's as slow as he'll go. He sounds like a very fast police siren now. But if I send a nice smooth sine wave into his pulse width modulation, he will sort of squeeze this square wave into different shapes. Let's try it. At one point, the pulse width is getting so extreme, it barely even changes at all. So if your either oscillator you're using as an LFO or your actual LFO allows you to adjust the pulse width on the square wave, I suggest you experiment with that. Most of the time, the other waveforms won't offer you pulse width modulation. It's generally only really useful on square waves, especially when they're being used as oscillators, and therefore it's only really available then. As you can see here, now that I've got the right LFOs in place, LFO A gives us those 5 shapes, and LFO B through E is just one of each of those shapes. The square wave doesn't have a pulse width modulation. They don't have an adjustable phase amount, which is, it's not bad, but it's good to know that that we have an LFO that has it if we needed it. And you might be saying, well, what about this one here? It's got up form of the sawtooth, but it doesn't have the downwards one. Well, the answer is you could probably flip that. I wonder which one would allow me to do that most easily. I was thinking of a logic circuit. This is a logic circuit called invert, but that isn't the one I was thinking about. I was thinking of, yeah, here we go. So again, this is, you can see how this one is a square wave that goes up, which it expects as the in, and a square wave which is upside down as it's out. I don't know if this would work, but I sure will experiment with it. Because that's what I wanted to do, right? What you see visually represented here, with the flipping of the wave 180 degrees, is exactly what I want to do with this guy so I can make him become a... Oh, will that make him a down wave? I think so. Well, anyway, it can't hurt to try. So first, let's just send him by himself to the oscillator to test. Right? He keeps going up and up. That's good. That's what we wanted to hear. So let's see what happens. No, it doesn't sound like the output is doing the right thing. Oh, I've just figured it out. I know what I need. What I need is control signal mixer. Yes. And this one has an inverter knob. So that's the functionality I need. By punching him in here and having nothing in the other input, here he should be rising. He's rising, good. Now let's click invert and he should be falling. Boom, we did it. I know that's not exactly the world's greatest synthetic achievement, but it's good to know that you can recreate the functionality if you have it. So again, they didn't offer me that wave, but the system offers you a way to get there, which is still quite cost effective in terms of processing power. Anyway, yeah. So those are the sounds of the LFOs that we heard. Let's not give up too quickly. Let's just leave this mixer here in case we need him later. We'll take some of the patches out. I didn't want to go in only today and look at quote-unquote normal LFOs because I think people know those, and especially in the modular world, one of the reasons you got into modular might be that you're tired of these. You might say, yes, those are nice little repeating patterns, but I want something weirder. And weirder, well, we gotcha. Let's look at what we have here. I was making fun of myself earlier, and rightly so, for constantly saying clocked random step generator. And Lord knows I say it a lot. But let's look at the... here they've got the standard LFOs. They've got the slave LFOs, which we have already laid out. And then Clock Gen is by himself, and there's this little section which doesn't really have a name. But I surely do come to that section a lot and make a lot of those modules. I use them almost more than anything, or certainly they're in my favorites. So let's look at exactly what they are and compare them. One of the reasons I want to do this is because, as I say, your system may have access to these waves. If you have a standard LFO, or if you're using an oscillator as an LFO, these are not going to be new to you. These, on the other hand, may exist in your Eurorack system. If you have VCV rack, I'm sure there's got to be ways to output particularly this one and this one here. As for the others, they're probably quite likely as well. Something like this, pattern gen. In Eurorack, there's the very popular Pamela's Workout, but there's many other things as well. They call them, what are they called? Euclidean pattern generators. I don't have the time or the math to go down a rabbit hole on all of what Euclidean patterns are, but let's just call them for now semi-random patterns that are repetitive and musically useful. And certainly there's many ways to generate those out there. What are some other ones? I use the Zorlon cannon to create semi-random clicks that are still clocked to an overall tempo. I love that one. It's a kind of linear shift register. There must be others. What other than Pamela's? What else do people like to use? Oh, I use grids as well from Mutable Instruments. That can make can shoot out pre-programmed drum type patterns, or it can also be set to Euclidean mode and make semi-random patterns. So, yeah, I guess if you have a question, ask. But there's a lot of ways to emulate this pattern generator in the Eurorack world, and certainly in VCV. I think I should probably do a bit more research on VCV, if that's what people out there who listen to this stream are using, so I can make some direct connections. I'll have to add that to my to-do list. So let's look at these guys and what their differences are in terms of the sound. We connected these LFOs to the pitch input. Well, let's do the same thing here. Since we've talked about this one a lot, let's just repeat it. We connect the clock output from here to the clock input here. Then we connect the random CV output to the pitch input. So before I turn the oscillator on, I can predict what I'm going to hear. I know that I'm playing a little super simple pattern here. Let me give you some more notes so you can definitely hear it. And before, when the notes played in the pattern, the LFOs were not synced up in any way, so they just, they modulated the sound whenever they wanted to, out of sync. Well, with the clock being fed both to the sequencer and to the clocked random step generator, you're going to get adjustments in pitch that are in time with the beat. So I've used these to modulate filters a lot before, or to modulate other parameters in oscillators or sound processors in order to make my music more synced up to the beat, and you're just going to hear that again. Here we go. Let's reduce the decay a bit. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the pitch is changing as like probably 16th notes. So that's what he does to the pitch. Notice that it's hard to see on my computer screen. Let's make the cables go away. But the illustration here shows steps. In other words, hard corners. It's most similar to this. The LFO has this 1 or 0 status. Well, here we don't have 1 or 0 status, but we have fixed random values that correspond to different positions, and they hold those positions for however long the clock tells them to hold them for. So this is similar to what might be called a sample and hold output on an LFO. It doesn't have anything to do with sampling, like in the sense of sampling a rap beat. It rather refers to checking a random number table and extracting a number for use. But the whole point is that it checks or it samples that random table at a certain time, and that time in this case is clocked to our overall system. I can demonstrate this by switching to another one. That's a little strange. There we go. So this is not changing in time with the beat. It's changing whenever it wants to. If I speed it up, should get more changes. Right? And if I send it way down again, it'll still change the pitch, but it'll hold the same pitch over a few notes. There, did you hear that? There we go. It changed again. See, and it changed again. So the only difference here being the clock, this one, if you decide you want something synced up musically to your beat, you use a clocked random step generator. And if you don't, you use the regular random step generator. But again, they're both spitting out quantized values. Values that have square edges in their little randomness, if you want to think about it that way. Let's go back to this guy, another popular guy for me, random generator. Let me just turn this off for a second. You can't see it in the abbreviation here, but this is clocked random step gen 1. And this one has the word step in his title as well. So again, step tells you it has hard corners like the square wave. Well, random gen doesn't have the word step in it, so he's transitioning smoothly between different random values. So in many ways, this one is most similar to the sine wave, which, as we said, also transitions smoothly between values. When applied to a pitch input, you're going to get something like a glissando, like a slide on a slide guitar from one pitch to another. If you used a step generator, you'd get something more like a guitar that has frets on it. So yeah, you can think of it as a difference between a fretted and an unfretted bass, if those instruments are familiar to you. Yeah, that's certainly one way of looking at it. Let's listen to this guy. So you can hear how the note slides around rather than changing instantly from one to another. Let's switch it over. This one is holding one value until it chooses to hold another. Feel free to change. There you go. Whereas this one is sliding from one value to another. Even at a slower speed, it should still be audible. So again, there's going to be different times when you want these different kinds of modulation to your sounds. I can imagine building a patch, like you say you want to build an ambient patch that changes gradually over time. You might use a lot of these random generators to introduce changes in tone or in the filter, maybe not in the pitch as we're doing here, but to other parameters. And by setting them to random, you know that over the course of the piece, if you let it run for 30 minutes or 60 minutes, the values are always going to be different. Whereas if you have a sine wave or a sawtooth wave, they're going to be kind of repetitive, and the human ear is going to detect that pattern pretty quickly. So if you want something that changes unpredictably over time, both this one and this one are going to be useful to you. I can do another hardware recommend because I've been looking at the nonlinear circuits modules. They make a module called Sloth, which is available in 3U or in 1U. And Sloth is kind of like this module, except it's really friggin' slow. When you dial this guy all the way to the left, he'll give you a little more than a minute. But I think Sloth has a setting which is measured in minutes, so it's like over an hour of random changes if you want it. And in fact, that's why it's named Sloth, because it can go so slow. So if you're trying to build these patches that change over time, but you say, oh, my LFOs, even their slowest speed is not slow enough, maybe Sloth will be useful to you. Is that available in VCV Rack? I do not know, but it certainly is available in the real modular world, in the hardware modular world. So let's look at the last few guys here. We're running out of time, but I think this is achieving most of what I wanted to achieve. For some reason, this guy has chosen to be yellow, but I get it. He's outputting a kind of square wave, so he technically falls into the logic category. But much like the square wave we used before, you can consider this one as a square wave outputter that has a randomness applied to the pulse width modulation. And in fact, it stays open or closed. When you set it to a slower speed, it will be in one binary state for longer, and then in the other binary state for longer, it will be on or it'll be off. So I think, despite this one being a blue input, I think I should still be able to make it work. It should still function. So there's the higher pitch. Wait till there's his lower pitch. And again, he's not clocked to this tempo, so he's not going to change in time with the pattern in any way, just rather randomly. Let's increase his speed. Right? So that's what that one does. Again, a kind of variation on a square wave, but it can be absolutely used as an input for control voltages if wanted, if needed. And finally onto this guy. This one is not going to be too useful to connect to here. I guess I can do it, but well, I guess we'll find out what kind of sound it gets. First of all, I just connected this this random output to the pattern and bank amounts, so the actual patterns will always be changing, and he won't give us any data if we don't give him a click, so we have to give him that, and we'll send the output to the pitch in, and we'll just listen. Oh, that's interesting. I thought it was only going to give us 0 or 1 type patterns. In other words, I thought it was going to give us square wave type data. But when it's connected to a blue output, it's actually giving us something very similar to this. Let's patch it across. You can't really hear the difference, can you? And it's because I've randomized the pattern that it's on. If I take the randomness out, you should get something. It's not very musical, but it repeats over time and over 16 beats. And again, the delta setting here just means there's less variation or space between the random jumps. So again, you can kind of not worry about this guy if you, unless you're an actual Nord Modular owner, you're not going to have something exactly like this. However, all these other ones here, there's ways to do them in Eurorack. I can't go out and tell you what all their names are, but a lot of standard LFO type control voltage will be available in these ones. They'll look like this. You'll see these markings. And a lot of devices like Pamela's Workout or things that create patterns will give you everything that this pattern gen can do, and also random pulse type stuff. And I haven't given a recommendation for these ones. There's certainly things like the Make Noise Woggle Bug, which is producing an odd sort of CV. I guess there's tons of strange CV out there on the market, so I probably can't really list them all. But you should be able to determine the difference. Oh, maybe, what's it called? Marbles by Mutable Instruments might give you some of these. I will say this before I stop today, which is that having access to weird CV is very fun. Oh, what's the other one I use? Qubit Chance. That's when I'm not using the Zorlon Canon in Eurorack, I use Qubit Chance to make these unpredictable, weird CVs. And it can do a lot of cool random pulse generation like this one. It actually has more options for outputs. But what can you do if you say, I don't have this stuff? None of these are available to me. Boom. All I have is standard LFO equipment. I've got 2 or I've got 3 standard LFOs, but they're very standard. So what can I do to make them interesting, to make them weird? What you really need is just to mix them together. Let's go back, and before we stop for today, let's just refresh the memory here. This is what a sine wave did to the pitch. including like a regular wobble here. So let's send that to one input in the control mixer. And here's another one, the square wave, which gave us an alternation between two tones. But since both of these are they may have their knobs set to whatever, even if you set them exactly the same to 1.1, that doesn't mean they're in sync because they're not synced by a master oscillator here. What I can tell you is if you turn them down a bit and you mix them in the control mixer, what you get should be something very unpredictable and odd. Oops, I forgot to turn this one on. So here you can still sort of hear the gradual fall or gradual rise of the sine wave, but it suddenly gets modulated by that square wave. So the square wave picks a new spot for it to start from. Or what if I took another control mixer and took the output of the first one and then send the output of the triangle wave into this input and connect that instead. Here we go. It's very odd and it's very hard to predict what it's going to do. So I guess my best advice is if you're stuck in the world of quote-unquote normal CV, there we go, that's quite bizarre. If you're stuck in the world of boring normal CV, all you really need is a way to mix CV signals and then make sure those signals are not in sync with each other, which shouldn't be very hard to do. They'll probably be the default. And you'll quite quickly get something which is unpredictable and weird, like what we're hearing right now. Control mixer doesn't even have to be a dedicated device, depending on your hardware. Some mixers, which are designed for mixing audio signals, will also mix control signals just fine. There are other options out there. I recently got a 4x4 control and audio signal mixer, which is like a matrix switch mixer. So you can send 4 inputs into it and then adjust how they interact with each other and audition the 4 outputs. So the real solution is, if you don't have weird CV of your own, try making your own CV. Try cooking your own by mixing it up here. I can remember I also used to use links by Mutable Instruments, which will allow you to mix control signals. And they came out with a more recent one called Kinks. I'm not sure if that particular one is for mixing CV, but Links was. Or Links is sort of like 3-in-1, and one of the functions was mixing control signals. I'm pretty sure I used that myself, and it has little LEDs so I could monitor what my CVs were doing. So I think that's it for today. I hope taking this deep dive into control voltage and into LFOs in particular has been useful or eye-opening or ear-opening, and we'll be diving into something different next time. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Father Moo signing off from the pulpit again. Have a great Sunday. Oops, forgot to save. There we go. Always gotta save. Always gotta save. If you're not saving, there should be recording. So be it. Peace.